Well, I was going to ask about the prospects of regaining control, but you've already pointed to how institutional bias will mean that it's going to be hard to do so under the current form of governance which we have. However, you've nodded to this rising counter elite, as it were. Have you read Peter Turchin's book End Times by any chance?
I'm familiar. I haven't read it. I'm familiar with Peter Turchin though.
Yeah, so his research, having looked at about 1,000 years of history, perhaps even more, looking at all of these times where there ended up being political disintegration within nations and within empires, it came about as elites became distant from and started to disregard the needs of those that they govern. And the time that things are more harmonious are when they're closer to them, they're closer to their needs. They govern not just in their interests, but they are actually able to be held accountable. And when they grow distant, conflict rises inexorably until such point as either reform happens, so they save it before things get really bad, or counter elites displace them. And there are many different ways which that happens. And some of them we've talked about how we don't want to happen, but it can happen in a violent and bloody revolution. It can happen in civil war, or it can happen through the means which we've developed over time within the Western world, a democratic handover. And so you've said you're confident you can see a rise in people who would be willing to take the reins and do something different. Where are these counter elites rising from to challenge the status quo? Do you see it besides you and people within your political milieu? Do you see institutions being set up that are going to be pushing against the grain we've been moving in for so long?
The battle that we face is pretty daunting. The power structure that we are up against is absolutely almost incomprehensibly complex and large, because we're not just talking about the government here. This is the problem. People need to understand that when we talk about the regime that governs us, it's not as simple as it just being, parliament. It's not nowhere near that simple. There has been a blurring of the lines between all of the various centers of power in our society, whether it's, again, it's the ones I've listed before, between the government, the NGOs, the civil service, the corporations, the media, the education institutions. These things all mass together to form this absolutely towering structure. And it's that in its totality that we are up against. So that's a daunting prospect. But again, every single day I am so heartened by the types of people who are drawn to the politics that I am myself drawn to. It's almost exclusively fit, young, attractive, normal, relatable, intelligent, driven, ambitious young people. And that's because it's only those people who are capable of actually righting this ship. Because, again, my parents' generation, quite frankly, they're already checked out. They have their lives, they have their jobs. They don't want to upset their own lives because they've got families to worry about and mortgages to pay off. I don't expect, people of that kind of generation to be the place where the change comes from. And so ultimately it has to be us. And I am, as I say, I'm so confident, and it's lit up and down the country, from every area of the country. There are these young people emerging who have this, it's just this quality that I don't think we've seen for a very long time in mainstream British politics. And it is just this uncompromising integrity, sincerity, commitment, and authenticity to Britain. It's out of a sense of love of this country and love of the people around them and love of family, love of history and love of tradition, that they're coming out and they feel as though they have to. That's the thing. That's how I think of myself. I can't bring myself to do anything else other than be involved in politics. And I'm not hugely pleased about that fact, because when I was at university, my plan was to go and join the army, but unfortunately they wouldn't let me in, because I never wanted to be the type of person that went straight from education into politics. But actually I found myself in a situation where I cannot, morally, I can't bring myself to do anything else, because I think that the hour is so dark and we live in this time that demands that people who are prepared to do so step forward and step up. That I have to. And there are dozens, maybe hundreds of other people similar to myself who are going through the same kind of thing. And I think that's amazing. I think it's beautiful. And that's why I say that we are inevitable.
I think there's probably a reason that the Overton window is shifting too, because I think a lot of the people that you're referring to, and I've certainly spotted a lot online, is that well, you're the online generation as well, and you know how to create content, for want of a better word. And it's slick. You're not afraid to produce videos of yourself, get messaging out. You can fit a lot of information hardly any time, not afraid to go on talk shows. And that's something I've certainly been struck by in the last couple of years, is seeing the likes of you, Connor, Harrison, Pitt, a whole bunch of others who wouldn't necessarily say they're part of the same ballpark, but people like Freya India, people who are going against this perceived wisdom on a whole bunch of different issues, or very countercultural, as you say, even though people would accuse you of being somehow establishment shills, no doubt. And I suppose the question is there a political vehicle for you? We've got Reform marching ahead in the polls. Are they going to be capable of doing the job required on immigration? And will we see an opening up, a democratizing of Reform, so it's less a Nigel Farage pet project, and it's opened up for it to become a proper political party? And is that something that you think younger people can be attracted to?
So what I'll say first is the people that I'm talking about here, we are people who would, under ordinary circumstances, be conservatives. We'd call ourselves conservatives. We'd say we have conservative values. But I don't call myself a conservative anymore. I used to, but I think I look around, especially institutionally speaking, what is left of value to conserve? Conservatism is the wrong mode to be thinking in, because there's an inertness to conservatism. There's a sense that the march of history is inevitable, and that, we're clinging on to these old values that we wish would come back, but actually, progress is progress and all the rest of it. No. What I think is there is no going back. There is no such thing as returning to this, that, or the other. There is only going forward. The question is which direction. And the direction that I favor is unrecognizably different to the one that the current power structure is heading in. At a certain level, the kind of world that I'm imagining that I would like to live in, at one level, it's very, very similar to the one that we live in now. People would still drive cars and people would still have computers and so on. But at almost every other level, it would be completely different, because there'd be a different sense of identity, community, culture, tradition, and all the rest of it. And so the question of what the most effective vehicle for this will be, I do actually have faith in Reform. I think Reform UK is the best vehicle we have for bringing these kinds of politics into the mainstream and beginning to affect the kind of change that we want to see. I think Nigel Farage recognizes this. I think he knows that what he is part of is bigger than him. This is a movement that, if done right, and if the right people are brought in and are allowed to have the kind of authority they would need, would be basically unstoppable. Because Reform already have Gen Z's curiosity. There was more Gen Z voters voted for Reform than they did the Tory party. What they need to do now is capture their attention. And I think there's a number of ways they can do that. One way they could do that is by establishing a youth wing. Another is by showing young voters why specifically their policies benefit them. But there's a number of things that need to be done there. But I just bring it. I have this undying optimism that things will not last in the way that they're currently going. And I think that, again, the caliber of person that is drawn to right-wing dissident politics is so much higher than the type of person who is drawn to mainstream regime-approved politics. And that's inevitably the case, because it requires a certain quality, a certain level of panache to put yourself out there in a dissident fashion. And so it's unsurprising that the people drawn to it are high caliber. So again, I would just bring it back to those people who say it's over, who say that Britain is done for and that there's no going back. I say to those people, where is your spine? I say to those people, stand up like a man. You're an Englishman. Start acting like it. And I think that what's coming cannot be stopped.